On her anniversary, she got divorce papers. Then a millionaire changed everything. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now let's get back to Claire Bennett. Claire never imagined the worst moment of her life would happen under warm candlelight. With violin music playing in the background and a chocolate anniversary cake sitting untouched between two glasses of wine. The restaurant was crowded. People were laughing. Forks clinked against plates. Someone nearby was actually proposing. But at Claire's table, everything had gone dead silent. Her husband, Daniel, had just slid a white envelope across the table without looking at her face. Claire stared at it. She blinked once, twice. Then she laughed nervously because people did stupid things as jokes sometimes. Daniel, what is this? She asked quietly. He finally looked at her. No guilt, no sadness, nothing. Divorce papers. Claire stopped breathing for a second. She thought she heard him wrong. Maybe she did. Maybe she wanted to. 3 years of marriage. 8 years together. Gone in 2 words. Divorce papers. Around them, people kept eating, kept talking, kept living. Meanwhile, Claire felt like someone had pulled the floor out from under her chair. On our anniversary, she whispered. Daniel leaned back and sighed like she was exhausting him. Claire, don't make this dramatic. Don't make this dramatic. Her fingers tightened around the edge of the table. Across the room, several people had started glancing over. A woman near the bar frowned. A man shook his head. Then Daniel said something that made the entire situation worse. Much worse. He checked his watch. Actually checked his watch. Then smirked. Relax. I have somewhere else to be in 20 minutes. Claire stared at him. Somewhere else? On their anniversary? Suddenly her eyes landed on a blonde woman sitting near the front windows. She wore a red dress. She was looking directly at Daniel, smiling, waiting. Claire felt her stomach twist. No, no way. Daniel followed her eyes and shrugged. That tiny shrug felt like a knife. You figured it out. Suddenly Claire stood up so fast her chair scraped loudly against the floor. Every head turned now. Every single head. One waiter even froze with plates in his hands. Daniel rolled his eyes. Sit down, Claire. But Claire couldn't move. Couldn't think. Couldn't breathe. And then, right at that exact moment, someone from another table suddenly stood up and said loudly, No, don't sit down. Claire turned slowly toward the voice. Near the center of the restaurant stood a tall man in a charcoal coat, his dinner untouched and a glass of water still in his hand. He looked around 38. Calm blue eyes. Dark hair. No tía. No attempt to look important. But something about him felt different. The room had gone strangely quiet around him. Daniel laughed under his breath. Great. Now random people are joining this. The man took a few steps closer. Actually, I was trying not to. His voice was steady. But I've been sitting here for the last 20 minutes listening to this entire conversation, and I think somebody needs to say what everyone else is thinking. Daniel crossed his arms. And what exactly is everyone thinking? The man looked at him for 2 seconds. Just 2. That ending a marriage on an anniversary dinner while another woman waits by the window is a pretty terrible thing to do. A few people nearby suddenly looked down at their plates, hiding smiles. Someone quietly muttered, He is not wrong. Daniel's face tightened immediately. Claire stood frozen beside the table. None of this felt real anymore. 10 minutes ago, she thought she was celebrating her anniversary. Now a stranger was defending her in front of an entire restaurant. Daniel let out a sarcastic laugh. Wow, congratulations. You want a medal? The man shrugged. No. He glanced at Claire. I just think people deserve basic respect. For some reason, those words hit Claire harder than the divorce papers. Basic respect. Such a simple thing. Such a small thing. And somehow tonight, it felt like the rarest thing in the world. Daniel shook his head and grabbed his jacket. You know what? I do not have time for this. He pulled out his wallet and tossed a few bills on the table carelessly. Keep the change. Then he looked directly at Claire. Sign the papers tomorrow. And just like that, he walked away. toward the blonde woman in red. Claire watched him lean down and say something that made her laugh before they walked out together. 8 years. 8 years disappeared through a restaurant door in less than 10 seconds. Nobody spoke. Claire sat down slowly. Her legs felt weak. She stared at the untouched anniversary cake in front of her. Happy anniversary, Claire and Daniel. Written in white frosting. Suddenly she laughed. Just once. A tiny broken laugh. Then tears immediately filled her eyes. Unbelievable, she whispered. The stranger stood there awkwardly for a second. I should probably go. Claire quickly wiped under her eyes. Wait. He stopped. She looked embarrassed immediately after saying it. She glanced around at all the people pretending not to stare anymore. I do not really want to sit here alone right now. The man hesitated. Then he sat down across from her. I am Ethan. Claire looked at him carefully for the first time. There was nothing flashy about him. No expensive watch on display. No attitude. No need to impress anyone. Just calm eyes and an oddly kind face. Claire. Ethan looked at the anniversary cake and tilted his head slightly. Can I say something? Claire nodded weakly. Ethan pointed at the cake. If he left. He paused dramatically. Does that mean I get half? Claire stared at him. For one full second, she looked offended. Then suddenly, completely against her own will, she laughed. Claire covered her mouth while laughing, almost looking confused by her own reaction. It was not a big laugh, not the kind that filled a room. But after everything that had happened in the last 15 minutes, it felt strange and almost wrong to laugh at all. Ethan smiled slightly. There it is. Claire looked at him. What? Your face looked different for a second. She frowned. Different how? Ethan leaned back in his chair. Alive. The smile disappeared from her face almost immediately. Not because she was offended, because somehow he was right. Claire looked down at the anniversary cake sitting between them. Just minutes ago, she had been staring at it like it represented the end of everything. Now some stranger was sitting across from her asking for half of it. The entire situation felt ridiculous. Completely ridiculous. You do this often? She asked. Ethan raised an eyebrow. Sit with heartbroken strangers? Claire nodded. No. He smiled. Actually, I'm doing terribly so far. I almost got kicked out once for interfering in somebody else's argument. Claire stared at him. Seriously? Ethan nodded with a perfectly serious face. No. Claire narrowed her eyes at him. Okay. Now I do not trust you. Fair. A waiter slowly walked toward them, carrying 2 forks. He looked nervous. Should I bring another plate? Ethan looked at Claire. Well, technically this was your husband's cake. Claire looked toward the restaurant entrance where Daniel had disappeared 20 minutes ago. Then she picked up the cake knife and cut a huge slice. No. She slid it toward Ethan. This is my cake now. Ethan looked impressed. That was the correct answer. For a while they sat there eating cake and talking. Not about Daniel. Not about divorce papers. Not about heartbreak. Somehow they started talking about random things instead. Claire worked as an elementary school art teacher. Ethan claimed he once failed a high school art class because he accidentally painted a bowl of fruit that looked like potatoes with faces. Claire laughed again. That cannot be real. Ethan shrugged. I wish it was not. The strange thing was Claire kept waiting for him to ask questions. She kept expecting him to say things people always said after bad news. Things like I am sorry, or you deserve better, or everything happens for a reason. But he never did. He just sat there, just listened, just treated her like a normal person. Outside, the restaurant window rain had started falling lightly against the glass. People walked by holding coats over their heads. Claire looked down at the folded divorce papers still sitting beside her purse. Reality slowly crept back in. The laughter faded. The warmth faded. Ethan noticed immediately. Hey, Claire looked up. You do not have to figure out your whole life tonight. Her eyes stayed on him. Easy for you to say. Ethan became quiet for a second. Really quiet. Then he looked down at his untouched glass of water. You would be surprised. Claire studied his face carefully. There was something there for a moment. Something heavy. Something hidden. Then it disappeared. She looked away slowly. Maybe everyone sitting in restaurants had invisible stories. Maybe everyone was carrying something. Claire stared at the rain outside and quietly thought to herself, if a complete stranger could show me, More kindness in 30 minutes than my own husband had in months. Then what exactly had I been calling love all this time? What would you have done if you were sitting in Claire's chair tonight? The restaurant slowly returned to normal around them. Glasses clinked again. Conversations restarted. A birthday song suddenly started somewhere near the back of the room, making the entire night feel strangely disconnected from reality. Claire stared outside at the rain for a few more seconds before realizing Ethan had quietly paid the bill. Her eyes widened immediately. Wait. No. Ethan looked confused. No what? You paid. Yes. Why? Ethan blinked once. Because they usually make people pay before leaving. Claire stared at him. I'm serious. Ethan looked down at the receipt in his hand. So am I. She folded her arms. You are a stranger. Correct. You do not know me. Still correct. Claire narrowed her eyes suspiciously. Okay. Now I definitely do not trust you. Ethan suddenly smiled again. Good. You should not trust random men from restaurants. For some reason, she almost laughed again. Almost. Outside, the rain had become heavier now. Water rolled down the windows in long silver lines. Claire reached for her purse, and the folded divorce papers slipped out onto the table again. Seeing them felt different this time. Not better. Just real. Ethan noticed, but said nothing. He stood and grabbed his coat from the back of the chair. Come on. Claire looked up. Come on where? Outside. Why? Ethan looked at her like the answer should have been obvious. Because I am pretty sure sitting next to divorce papers all night was not your anniversary plan. 5 minutes later, they stepped outside into the cool evening air. Downtown Chicago looked different in the rain. Streetlights reflected on wet sidewalks. Cars moved slowly through shining streets. Claire wrapped her arms around herself as cold wind brushed past. Ethan noticed immediately and held out his coat. Claire looked at it, then looked at him. Absolutely not. Ethan raised an eyebrow. You are freezing. I am fine. Claire, I barely know you. You ate my half of the cake. Claire stared at him for a second before realizing what he had done. Wait a minute. She pointed at him. That was my cake. Ethan put a hand over his chest dramatically. Wow. And after all we have been through tonight. Claire shook her head and laughed softly again before finally taking the coat. It felt warm immediately. Too warm. Like it had been sitting close to someone for a long time. They walked slowly without really choosing a direction. The strange thing was Claire did not want to go home yet. Home suddenly felt wrong. Home meant empty rooms and photographs and closets and explanations she was not ready for. Ethan did not ask where she wanted to go. He just walked beside her quietly. Eventually, they reached a small park with benches facing the river. Claire sat down and stared at the water below. Ethan sat beside her without speaking. Nearly a minute passed. Then Claire suddenly asked, Who hurt you? Ethan turned toward her slowly. His expression changed immediately. Claire noticed it. The humor disappeared. The warmth shifted. For the first time all night, his eyes looked heavy again. Really heavy. Ethan looked down at the rainwater gathered near his shoes and quietly said, That is a very interesting question. Claire looked at him carefully. The rain continued falling around them in soft waves while city lights reflected across the river below. Ethan still had not looked up. For the first time since she met him, he looked like someone carrying something much heavier than a simple bad day. Claire immediately felt guilty. Sorry, she said quietly. You do not have to answer that. Ethan remained silent for another few seconds. Then he let out a small breath and leaned back against the bench. No, it is okay. He looked up at the dark sky. 3 years ago, my wife died. Claire froze. Every thought in her head stopped instantly. Ethan kept his eyes forward. His voice never shook. That almost made it worse. Car accident, he said quietly. Rainy night. Very similar to this one. Claire suddenly understood everything. The strange sadness in his eyes. The way he noticed small emotions. The way he listened without trying to fix things. Ethan smiled weakly, but it looked tired. Everyone around me kept saying the same thing afterward. He looked at Claire. Stay strong. Move on. Time heals everything. He gave a small laugh without humor. People say strange things when they do not know what else to say. Claire stared at him. Suddenly her own pain felt different. Smaller was not the right word. just connected. She had walked into tonight believing she was the only person in the world falling apart. But sitting beside Ethan suddenly reminded her that Payne did not care how people looked on the outside. Payne just showed up. Ethan rubbed his hands together slowly. The strange thing is, he paused. People think losing someone happens once. Claire listened quietly. It does not. Ethan looked at the river. It happens every morning when you wake up and remember again. Neither of them spoke after that. They just sat there while rain tapped softly against nearby trees. Claire could not remember the last time someone had spoken honestly around her. Not carefully, not politely, honestly. Eventually Ethan stood up and stretched slightly. Okay. Claire looked at him. Ethan clapped his hands once. New rule. She blinked. New rule. Yes. He pointed toward her. No more sadness for 5 minutes. Claire stared at him. That is impossible. No. Ethan pointed farther down the street. I just saw a 24-hour diner. Claire followed his finger. Bright lights glowed at the corner across the road. A neon sign flashed open beneath a cartoon coffee cup wearing sunglasses. Claire looked back at him. You are taking me to a diner? Ethan looked offended. Excuse me. I am rescuing you with pancakes. 20 minutes later, Claire sat in a red booth, holding a coffee mug while Ethan studied an enormous menu with serious concentration. This is stressful, he said. Claire looked confused. Ow! Ethan lowered the menu slowly. They have 13 kinds of pancakes. Claire stared at him. Ethan, no human should have this much responsibility. Claire shook her head and laughed again. A real laugh this time. Bigger than before. Warmer than before. Then her phone suddenly buzzed against the table. Claire looked down casually. The smile disappeared from her face immediately. Daniel. One new message. She slowly opened it. Her heart dropped. The message contained a photo. Daniel and the blonde woman smiling together inside some expensive rooftop bar. Beneath it was one sentence. You should sign the papers tomorrow because I already moved on. Claire stared at the phone screen without moving. For a few seconds, she forgot about the coffee sitting in front of her. Forgot about the pancakes. Forgot about the rain outside. The only thing she could see was Daniel's face smiling beside another woman. Smiling on the same night he handed her divorce papers. Ethan noticed her expression change immediately. He did not lean over. He did not ask to see the phone. He simply watched her face carefully. Claire. She looked up slowly and handed him the phone without saying a word. Ethan read the message. His jaw tightened for just a second. Then his expression relaxed again. He placed the phone face down on the table and looked back at her. Okay. Claire blinked. Okay. Yes. Claire stared at him in disbelief. That is all you have to say? Ethan nodded once. That is all. She sat back against the booth. I did not understand you. Ethan tilted his head. You think I should say something dramatic? Claire folded her arms. Maybe. Ethan pretended to think for a second. Fine. He cleared his throat and lowered his voice dramatically. Claire, destiny has brought us together tonight under the sacred reign of heartbreak. Claire narrowed her eyes immediately. Stop. Ethan continued. Your ex-husband is clearly a fool blinded by his own terrible life decisions. Ethan, and now you shall rise stronger than ever before. Claire stared at him for 2 seconds before shaking her head and laughing despite herself. Ethan smiled slightly. There she is again. Claire looked down at the table. You keep doing that. Doing what? Making me laugh when I should probably be crying. Ethan became quiet for a moment. Then he looked at her seriously. Who decided those things could not happen at the same time? Claire looked at him. The smile slowly faded from her face. Because somehow, once again, he had said something simple that landed directly in the middle of her chest. A waitress walked over carrying a huge stack of pancakes covered with strawberries and whipped cream. She carefully placed them in front of Ethan and looked at him with concern. Sir, are you sure this is for one person? Ethan looked offended immediately. You doubt me. Claire laughed under her breath while the waitress smiled awkwardly and walked away. Ethan looked down at the mountain of pancakes, then looked back up at Claire very slowly. I have made a mistake. Claire stared at him. A serious mistake. For the next several minutes, they sat there sharing pancakes and talking about absolutely nothing important. Favorite movies. Terrible school memories. Weird childhood habits. Claire found herself forgetting to check her phone. Forgetting to think about Daniel every 10 seconds. Forgetting the pain for tiny moments at a time. Then Ethan's phone suddenly buzzed beside his coffee cup. He glanced down quickly. Claire noticed his face change instantly. Not sadness this time. Stress. Real stress. Ethan immediately flipped the phone over face down. Too quickly. Too casually. Too late. Claire had already seen the screen light up for a second. 5 missed calls. 1 message. Emergency board meeting. Claire looked at him carefully. Ethan forced a small smile. Everything okay? She asked quietly. Ethan looked directly at her. Then he smiled again. But this time something felt different. Yeah, he said. Everything is fine. Claire stared at him silently. Because tonight, she had already learned one thing. People smiled right before they hid the truth. Tell me honestly, have you ever looked at someone and known they were pretending to be okay? Claire kept looking at Ethan after he said everything was fine. The words sounded normal. The smile looked normal. But now she could see it. The tiny pause before he answered. The way his fingers stayed wrapped around his coffee mug a little too tightly. The way his eyes shifted away for half a second. She had spent years pretending inside her own marriage. Years saying things were fine when they were not. Suddenly, she recognized the language. It was not spoken. It was hidden. Claire did not push him. She simply nodded slowly. Okay. Ethan looked relieved for a moment. But then he glanced at her suspiciously. That okay felt dangerous. Claire raised an eyebrow. Dangerous? Yes. Ethan pointed at her with his fork. That was not a real okay. That was one of those okay words people use when they are secretly building questions inside their head. Claire stared at him for a second and laughed softly. You analyze people a lot. Ethan shrugged. Occupational hazard. Claire frowned immediately. Occupational hazard? Ethan realized what he said and looked away. Nothing. Claire narrowed her eyes. No, absolutely not. You did not get to say mysterious things all night. Ethan looked down at his pancakes. I work too much. Claire kept staring at him. That is your answer? Yes. Terrible answer. Ethan sighed dramatically. Very judgmental tonight. Claire crossed her arms. You listened to me for hours. Ethan nodded. Correct. You shared something painful. Correct. You defended me in a restaurant. Also correct. Claire leaned forward slightly. Meanwhile, I still do not know what you actually do. Ethan opened his mouth. Close it again. Then he looked around the diner like the ceiling might rescue him. It did not. Claire tried not to smile. Ethan. He sighed again. Fine. Claire waited. Ethan looked directly at her. I work in business. Silence. Claire blinked once. Business? Ethan nodded seriously. Yes. Claire stared at him. That is your answer? Yes. Business is not a job. Ethan pointed toward the window. People are driving cars outside. Claire looked confused. What does that mean? Cars are transportation. Claire narrowed her eyes. I dislike you a little right now. Ethan grinned. No, you do not. Claire looked away to hide another smile. The strange thing was she had known this man for only a few hours, but tonight felt divided into 2 different worlds. Before Ethan and after Ethan. Before heartbreak and after laughter. Before feeling abandoned and after remembering she still existed outside someone else's choices. The waitress returned carrying the check. Ethan reached for it immediately. Claire slapped her hand over it first. Ethan looked offended. Excuse me? Claire held the receipt against her chest. No. Ethan stared at her. No. Claire nodded firmly. You already paid for dinner. You bought emergency pancakes. Ethan looked shocked. Emergency pancakes? Yes. Claire pointed at the plate. Medical treatment. Ethan looked down at the pancakes. Honestly, she makes a strong argument, he told the waitress. The waitress laughed while Ethan reluctantly raised both hands in surrender. Claire smiled proudly and reached into her purse for her wallet. Then she froze. Her smile disappeared instantly, because inside her purse, beneath her wallet and beside the divorce papers, sat a small velvet jewelry box. The anniversary gift she never got to give Daniel. Claire stared at the small velvet box like it had suddenly appeared out of nowhere. Her fingers slowly tightened around the edge of her purse. Ethan noticed immediately. Claire, She did not answer. She carefully lifted the box out and stared at it silently. Hours ago, this little box had felt important. Hours ago, she had imagined Daniel opening it across candlelight with a smile on his face. She had imagined him laughing and pulling her closer and saying she always knew exactly what to get him. Now it just sat there in her hand feeling strangely heavy. Ethan looked at the box and then looked back at her face. He did not ask what was inside. He simply waited. Claire gave a weak smile without humor. I forgot about this. Ethan stayed quiet. Claire slowly opened the lid. Inside sat a silver watch with a dark blue face and simple engraving on the back. Ethan glanced at it for only a second. That looks expensive. Claire let out a small breath. I saved for 4 months. Ethan looked at her. Claire kept staring at the watch. I stopped buying coffee before work. She smiled sadly. I packed lunches every day. Her fingers lightly touched the engraving. I wanted it to be special. Ethan watched her quietly. Claire swallowed hard. I even had something written on the back. Ethan looked away respectfully. But Claire turned the watch slightly anyway. The words reflected under the diner lights. To many more years together. Love, Claire. Silence sat between them. Claire suddenly laughed once. A small broken sound. Wow. Ethan looked at her carefully. Hey. Claire shook her head. No, really. She stared at the watch. Do you know what is funny? Ethan said nothing. I spent so much time trying to become exactly what someone else wanted that I stopped noticing who I was becoming. She slowly closed the box again. I kept making excuses for him. Her eyes stayed on the table now. He worked too much. He was stressed. He was tired. Ethan listened. Then one day you wake up and realize you have been sitting alone inside your own marriage. Ethan looked down at his coffee cup for a second. Then he reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a black marker. Claire looked confused immediately. Why do you have a marker? Ethan looked equally confused. People ask me that a lot. Claire narrowed her eyes. No normal person carries markers. Ethan ignored her and took the velvet box gently. Before Claire could ask what he was doing, he flipped the box over and wrote something on the bottom. Then he slid it back toward her. Claire looked down. Written in simple black letters were 4 words. Now you're lost tonight. Claire stared at it. Ethan shrugged awkwardly. I know it is not poetry. Claire looked up at him. Ethan. He looked nervous suddenly. Really nervous. Too much. Claire kept staring at him. Her eyes slowly filled with tears again, but this time something was different. These were not the same tears from the restaurant. Not from shock. Not from heartbreak. Something warmer sat behind him now. Something softer. Then Ethan's phone suddenly rang again. Not a message this time. An actual call. Ethan looked at the screen, and his face lost all color. Claire saw the name before he could turn it away. Carter Global Holdings. Claire stared at the screen while her mind tried to catch up with what her eyes had just seen. Carter Global Holdings. She knew that name. Everyone knew that name. Huge buildings downtown carried that name. News articles carried that name. Education programs carried that name. Ethan looked like someone caught standing in the wrong place at the wrong time. Slowly he reached for the phone and pressed decline. Silence. Claire blinked once. Twice. Then she looked at him. Ethan. He looked back carefully. Yes. Claire pointed at the phone. No. Ethan looked confused. No. Absolutely not. She folded her arms. Do not do that thing. Ethan stared at her. What thing? Claire leaned forward. The thing where you suddenly pretend Carter is your last name and you accidentally forgot to mention you own 3 buildings and a private island. Ethan stared at her for 2 seconds. Then he slowly looked down at the table. Then back up again. Technically, I do not own an island. Claire's eyes widened. Silence. Complete silence. Then Ethan smiled weakly. Okay, that sounded worse than I wanted it to. Claire simply stared at him. 5 seconds passed. 10 seconds passed. Then suddenly she started laughing. Full laughing. Head down. Hands covering her face. Ethan looked completely confused. Claire. She looked up with tears in her eyes from laughing. Tonight started with my husband handing me divorce papers. Ethan stayed quiet. Claire pointed at him. And now I am apparently eating emergency pancakes with a millionaire who carries markers in his pocket. Ethan blinked. When you say it like that. No. Listen to yourself. Ethan laughed too now. A real laugh. honest and warm. Eventually the laughter settled and the world became quiet again. Claire looked at him differently now. Not because of the money, not because of Carter Global Holdings, because suddenly everything made sense. The way people called him constantly, the way he watched people carefully, the way he avoided talking about work, the way he sat in an ordinary restaurant eating cake with a stranger instead of acting important. Claire looked down at the small velvet box again, then at the words Ethan had written. Not your loss tonight. Slowly she slid the box toward him. Ethan looked confused. What are you doing? Claire smiled softly. Open it. Ethan hesitated before lifting the lid. Inside sat the silver watch. Ethan immediately looked up. Claire! She shook her head gently. Read the back. Ethan turned it over and smiled when he saw the engraving. To many more years together. Love, Claire. He looked back up confused. Claire smiled and carefully took the marker from his hand. Then beneath the old words, she added 4 new ones. Start over from here. Ethan stared at the watch for a long moment, then looked at her. Neither of them spoke. They did not need to, because sometimes life does something strange. Sometimes it closes one door and quietly leaves another one unlocked without you noticing. Claire thought she lost everything that night. Instead, she lost the person who was already walking away and found someone who sat beside her when she was falling apart. Maybe that is the lesson hidden inside tonight's story. Real love is not about status. It is not about money. It is not about grand promises. Real love looks a lot like kindness when you least expect it. And if this story touched your heart, even a little, remember to like, subscribe, and share it with someone who might need a reminder that endings are not always endings. Sometimes they're simply the beginning of something better. And before you go, tell me this. Was meeting Ethan luck or fate?